The janitor had worked in that building for years, yet most people barely noticed him. They passed by him every morning, stepping around his cleaning cart without a greeting, acting like he was part of the furniture. But he didn't complain. He never did. He showed up early, stayed late, and did his work quietly. His uniform was old and washed so many times that the color had faded. His shoes had worn edges, but he still polished them every night at home. It was his little way of reminding himself that he mattered, even if others didn't see it. Every day he arrived before sunrise. The halls were cold and empty, the kind of quiet that made him feel both peaceful and lonely at the same time. He would mop the floors, wipe the windows, empty the trash bins, and make sure everything looked clean before the employees arrived. He took pride in small things, the shine on the floor, the neat arrangement of chairs, the way the hallway smelled fresh. It made him feel useful. The employees, mostly young and loud, often joked around in groups. He didn't understand their digital slang or their inside jokes, but he didn't mind. He stayed in the background. That was where he felt safest, but there were days when the laughter wasn't innocent. Some of the younger workers found entertainment in making fun of him. They whispered comments about his old jacket, his quiet walk, or the way he ate lunch alone at the corner table of the cafeteria. They didn't say these things to his face, but he heard them. He always heard them. He just pretended he didn't. He wasn't upset at them. He was more disappointed in himself for still feeling hurt. He had lived long enough to know the world wasn't always kind. Still, he kept going. One morning, as he was changing a trash bag, he overheard a group chatting near the elevator. They didn't see him around the corner. Imagine him on a date. One of them whispered, "He'd probably show up with a flower from the office garden." Another laughed, "Hey, what if we set him up?" A third voice said, "Like a blind date, but as a joke." The others snickered. The janitor froze, his hands still holding the half-tied trash bag. He knew they were talking about him. He could tell by the tone, the kind of tone people used when they thought someone wasn't worth taking seriously. He stood there for a moment, letting their words wash over him. It wasn't the first time people joked about him, but something about their laughter deeper that day. Before he moved away, he heard the last line clearly. "We'll tell him a new coworker likes him. Let's see how he reacts." He didn't react at all. He just went back to his work, tying the bag tightly and placing it into the bin. His movements were slow, thoughtful. He didn't want to think about what they were planning, but he couldn't stop his mind from wandering. Later that afternoon, one of those employees approached him. The man tried to act friendly, but the janitor could see the amusement hidden in his eyes. "Hey," the employee said casually, "there's someone here who... Well, she noticed you. She said you seem really kind. She wants to meet you for dinner." The janitor lifted his head slowly. "Me?" he asked softly. "Yeah," the man replied, suppressing a grin. "She's new, and she said she admires how you work. She wants to meet tomorrow evening at the restaurant down the street." The janitor said nothing for a long moment. He looked down at his hands, rough from years of scrubbing floors and carrying heavy bags. "It's been a long time since anyone," he whispered, unable to finish his sentence. The employee shrugged lightly. "Well, she really wants to see you. You should go." The janitor nodded slowly, even though a small part inside him felt uncertain. It had been years since he thought about dating. His life was simple work, home, sleep, repeat. He hadn't imagined someone noticing him in that way. But the idea warmed something inside him, a feeling he had almost forgotten. "Thank you," he said quietly. The employee walked away, returning to his group to share the update. The janitor didn't see their smirks or their whispered jokes. He didn't see the way one of them shook his head, saying, "I can't believe he actually fell for it." He only felt a strange mixture of nervousness and hope. For the rest of the day, he worked with a lighter step. He found himself smoothing his hair in the reflection of the window. He polished his shoes twice. He even practiced a small smile, wondering what he would say when he met this woman. But while the adults in the office continued their jokes, someone else was watching silently. A little girl. She was often at the office after school, sitting on a chair with her backpack beside her, doing homework while waiting for her father to finish his shift. She wasn't like the adults. She didn't rush past the janitor. She didn't look away. She noticed things. She noticed how gently he picked up her fallen pencil without being asked. She noticed how he cleaned around her area quietly so he wouldn't disturb her reading. She noticed when he looked tired, when his shoulders slumped, and when he forced a smile. Children see things that grown-ups pretend not to see. That afternoon, she saw something else. From her chair, she watched as the group laughed together, hiding their phones like they were planning something funny. She didn't know what it was at first, but she felt uneasy. Later, she overheard part of their conversation. He actually believes it. Tomorrow night. This is going to be hilarious. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. She looked across the room at the janitor, who was stacking cleaning supplies back into his cart with careful hands. He looked different, almost nervous, almost hopeful. She didn't know why, but her heart felt heavy. She slid off her chair and walked closer to him. He noticed her and gave a small smile. "Are you done with your homework?" he asked softly. "Almost," she replied. But her eyes stayed fixed on him, studying him. "You look excited," she said quietly. He blinked. "Do I?" His voice carried both surprise and shyness. She nodded. "Yes. Did something good happen?" He paused and smiled in a shy, gentle way. "Maybe. Someone wants to meet me for dinner." The little girl's expression changed. Her eyes widened and softened with concern. "Who?" she asked. He shrugged lightly. "A new coworker," they said. She looked toward the group across the room. They were still laughing, still whispering. She felt something twist in her stomach. "Are you sure it's real?" she asked in a small voice. The janitor's smile faded just a little. He didn't answer right away. He didn't want to doubt it. He didn't want to think that something so kind could be fake. Not after all these years. "I hope it is," he said finally. The girl stood there silently, unsure what to say. She didn't want to hurt him, but she didn't like how the adults were acting. Later that day, when her father came to take her home, she tugged his sleeve. "Dad," she whispered, "something's wrong. They're planning something about him." Her father glanced at the janitor, then at the laughing group. "They're probably just joking around," he said. "Don't worry." But she did worry, because sometimes kids understand things long before adults do. That night, the janitor prepared for the next day. He washed his nicest shirt, even though it had a small tear near the sleeve. He ironed it carefully. He polished his shoes again. He even practiced what he might say, simple words. But honest that he didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But somewhere in that same town, a little girl was thinking about him too, her heart uneasy, wishing the world was kinder than what she had just seen. The little girl could not stop thinking about the janitor that night. Even after she reached home, changed her clothes, and sat at the dinner table, her mind kept circling back to the look on his face. It wasn't the look of someone playing along with a joke. It was the look of someone who hadn't received kindness in a long time, and was finally hoping for a little of it. She pushed her food around with her spoon instead of eating. Her father noticed. "Long day?" he asked. She nodded, but her thoughts were far deeper than he imagined. She wanted to tell him again that something felt wrong, but he was busy reading messages from work. She knew he wasn't ignoring her. He was just tired too. So she kept quiet and finished her meal. Before bed, she sat by the window, thinking about the janitor's soft smile. Something inside her whispered that tomorrow would not go well for him, and she didn't want him to face it alone. While she wrestled with her thoughts at home, the janitor sat on the edge of his small bed in his tiny rented room. He wasn't a man who owned many things. His room held a small table, a chair, an old wardrobe, and a single-framed picture of his late mother. Everything else he owned was folded neatly into drawers or placed carefully on shelves. He had washed his shirt earlier and hung it by the window to dry. It fluttered gently with the night breeze. He checked it twice more before he lay down, making sure it was clean and smooth. He had even taken out a small bar of soap to scrub his shoes again, though they were already polished. But the truth was, he wasn't preparing for a date. He was preparing for hope. For years, he had carried loneliness quietly, like a weight he no longer questioned. He didn't expect joy. He didn't expect surprises. His life was routine, sometimes heavy, sometimes empty, but steady. So the thought that someone might see him, really see him, felt unreal. He knew he was not an exciting man. He didn't have a fancy job or a big car. He didn't have bright clothes or sharp jokes. He only had kindness, hard work, and a heart that still wished for connection, even when he pretended it didn't. As he lay in bed, he closed his eyes and imagined what the dinner might be like. He imagined greeting a woman who smiled at him for the first time in years. He imagined receiving a compliment, maybe even laughing. He imagined feeling like he belonged in a world where people often walked past him. He didn't hear the laughter the employees shared later that night in their group chat. He didn't see the short messages they exchanged, all mocking the evening they believed would unfold. They were excited for entertainment. They thought they would witness something funny, but the janitor was not a joke. He was a man who believed he was being given a small chance. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual. He shaved carefully, brushed his hair, and put on the shirt he had ironed the night before. It wasn't new, but it was his best. He wore it with a gentle pride. When he arrived at the building, he kept his head down, trying not to draw attention. But a few employees noticed his clothes. Their smirks told him more than words could. Still, he stayed quiet. The little girl arrived a bit later with her father. She saw the janitor standing by the stairwell with his cart, dressed nicer than usual. Her heart pulled tight. She walked over to him with her backpack still on. "You look very different today," she said softly. He smiled shyly. "I have something important tonight." She swallowed hard. "About that, I don't think—" But before she could finish, one of the pranksters walked by and cut her off. "Big plans tonight?" the young employee said with a grin. The janitor only nodded politely. The little girl's eyes narrowed. She didn't like how the employee's grin looked like someone waiting to watch someone else fall. Most adults would brush it off. But children notice what adults miss. The janitor returned to his work, sweeping the lobby slowly, lost in his thoughts. Meanwhile, the little girl followed her father to his office, but her mind wasn't on school assignments or drawings. She kept glancing outside the glass walls to check on him. Throughout the day, she watched him quietly. She saw how he tried to hide his nervousness. She noticed the way he double-checked the time every so often, the way his hands shook slightly when he thought no one was looking. Lunch came. She watched him sit alone, just like always. His tray held the same simple food, a small sandwich and a cup of tea. But today, he ate less than usual, too distracted by the evening ahead, the pranksters. Across the room whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "He thinks it's real. He's probably going to dress up more before he leaves. This is going to be the funniest thing we've ever done." Their laughter pushed a wave of anger. through her a kind of anger. Only a child with a kind heart feels when she sees someone being hurt. She looked back at the janitor. He didn't look up. Maybe he didn't hear them clearly. Maybe he pretended not to, but she knew he heard something. He always heard more than he let on. When the day ended, employees rushed out excitedly, ready to watch the show they had created. A few of them planned to sit at the restaurant early to record his reaction. They carried their phones fully charged, ready to laugh. The little girl's father gathered his things and told her to pack up. She stood slowly. "Dad," she said again, her voice quiet but firm, "we need to go to the restaurant." Her father sighed. "Sweetheart, I told you, these adults are just messing around. It's nothing serious." "It's serious to him," she replied. Those 4 simple words made her father stop. He looked at her face, really looked, and saw something he hadn't before, genuine worry. And guilt settled into his chest. After a long breath, he nodded. "Okay," he said. "Let's go." The little girl didn't smile in victory. She simply grabbed her backpack and followed him out. Meanwhile, the janitor had already gone home to change one last time. He didn't have much, but he did have a small flower he picked from a bush outside his building, a simple white one. He placed it gently into a pocket so it wouldn't get crushed. He looked at himself in the mirror before leaving. He wasn't handsome or fancy, but he stood tall. He wanted to make a good impression, even if he wasn't sure what he deserved anymore. He took a deep breath and whispered a quiet hope. Then he left for the restaurant. As he walked down the street, he didn't know that a group of people were already waiting there to laugh. He didn't know that their phones were ready to capture his disappointment, but he also didn't know that someone else was coming, someone small, someone who saw him the way no one else did, someone who refused to let him be alone. The little girl's legs swung nervously in the back seat as she and her father drove to the restaurant. She kept looking out the window, searching for him. When she finally spotted his slow, careful walk on the sidewalk ahead, her chest tightened with worry. At the same time, inside the warm-lit restaurant, the pranksters were already seated. Their drinks were untouched. Their eyes kept flicking to the door. Waiting, expecting a moment they could laugh at. But outside, life was unfolding differently. And the night was about to show everyone what only one little girl already understood. The restaurant glowed with warm lights, the kind that made the tables look inviting and the air feel soft. But for the janitor, each step toward the entrance felt heavier than the last. His heart beat faster, not because he was afraid, but because he hadn't felt this kind of hope in a long time. He wondered what he would see when he opened the door. Would she be sitting near the window? Would she smile when she spotted him? He held the small white flower gently in his hand. It looked fragile, but to him it was a symbol of effort, of wanting to show he cared. He hoped she would like it. He pushed open the restaurant door slowly. Inside, the pranksters spotted him immediately. They nudged each other and lowered their heads, pretending to look at their menus, while their phones stayed ready in their hands. Their faces were full of excitement, but not the kind that came from kindness. The janitor didn't notice them. His eyes were busy scanning the room, searching for a face he had never seen, but imagined warmly. He walked to the hostess stand and cleared his throat softly. "I'm here to meet someone," he said. The hostess smiled politely. "Name?" He hesitated. "I don't know her name. She just said she wanted to meet me." The hostess looked confused, but before she could ask further, one of the pranksters called out from their table, "She be here soon," he said, waving a hand casually. The janitor turned toward the voice and gave a gentle nod, believing it. The hostess stepped aside and allowed him to wait inside. He chose a small table close to the corner, a quiet place where he could see the entrance clearly. He sat carefully, placing the flower in the center of the table, smoothing the sleeve of his old but neatly pressed shirt. Minutes began to pass. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 15. The pranksters kept watching, trying to hold in their laughter as he adjusted his posture, fixed his hair, and checked the door repeatedly. The janitor tried to stay calm, reminding himself that maybe she was just running late. Maybe she had a busy day. Maybe she was on her way right now. But deep inside, a small whisper of doubt began to appear. Meanwhile, outside, the little girl and her father arrived. The girl jumped out of the car the moment the tires stopped rolling. She pressed her face against the restaurant window, and her heart dropped. She saw him, sitting alone, looking hopeful, and she saw the pranksters, hiding their smiles in their phones. Without waiting for her father, she pushed the restaurant door open and walked straight inside. Her small feet pattered quickly across the floor as she went toward the janitor. He looked up surprised. "Oh," he said softly, "are you here with your father?" She shook her head and pulled out the chair across from him. "I'm here for you," she said. The janitor blinked, confused. "For me?" She nodded. "I don't want you to sit alone." He stared at her for a moment, his eyes gentle but puzzled. "But shouldn't you sit with your dad?" "He'll be here," she replied. "Right now, you shouldn't be alone." He looked at her, then at the flower on the table, then back at her kind little face. Slowly, a small emotional smile formed. "Thank you," he whispered. Across the room, the pranksters fell silent. They hadn't expected this. The little girl's father entered moments later, his expression changing as soon as he saw what was happening. He approached the table quietly, but didn't interrupt. Instead, he placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "You okay here?" he asked softly. She nodded. "He needs company." The father looked at the janitor. Guilt touched his eyes. He knew now this wasn't harmless fun. This was cruelty. "I'll sit nearby," he said, taking a seat at a table close enough to watch over them, but far enough not to intrude. The janitor looked down at his hands, then at the girl again. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "You shouldn't be in the middle of this." She shook her head again. "You didn't do anything wrong." They did. Her innocence, her honesty, hit him harder than any of the whispers he had heard from adults. The waitress came to ask if they wanted anything. The girl ordered a small drink, and the janitor asked for water. He didn't want to spend too much money, especially when he didn't know how the evening would end. "Can I ask you something?" the girl said once the waitress walked away. "Of course," he replied. "Do you really think someone wanted to meet you today?" The words were gentle, not mocking. They were spoken with sadness, not sarcasm. The janitor looked down, feeling his chest tighten. "I wanted to believe it," he whispered. "Maybe more than I should have." "It's not your fault," she said. "It's theirs. They lied. Not you." The janitor looked into her eyes, surprised by the strength in her small voice. "A long time ago," he began slowly, "I used to be different. I used to have a good job, friends, a home that felt warm. But life, it changed." The little girl listened carefully, leaning forward. "My mother got very sick," he continued. "She needed someone to take care of her, and I was all she had. So I left everything else behind." He paused, and the girl saw his eyes soften with memory, both love and loss. "I took care of her for years. When she passed, I had nothing left. Not money, not a home, not the old job I had. So I found whatever work I could." "And that's why you're a janitor now?" she asked gently. He nodded. "It's honest work, and I'm grateful for it. But sometimes people think it means I am less." "You're not less," she said firmly. Those 3 words made his throat tighten. Across the room, the pranksters watched quietly now. Their laughter had faded. They didn't lift their phones anymore. Something heavy and uncomfortable had settled in their chests. The waitress brought the drinks. The little girl sipped hers while the janitor stared at the flower on the table. "I brought this for her," he said softly. The girl looked at it, then back at him. "It's beautiful. Anyone would be lucky to get a flower from you." He smiled again, this time with a small hint of pain. "Thank you. That means more than you know." The little girl picked up the flower gently and handed it back to him. "You didn't bring it for a prank," she said. "You brought it because you're kind. Keep it. Don't let them take that from you." The janitor's eyes glistened. Her father watched from his table, feeling a deep shame settle inside him, not because he had done anything wrong, but because he had ignored the little warnings his daughter gave him. Finally, he stood and walked to the prankster's table. "You should leave," he said quietly but firmly. They looked up, startled. "This stopped being funny the moment you saw the look on his face," he continued. "He's a human being. You crossed a line." One of them opened his mouth to argue, but the words never came. Their eyes shifted toward the janitor, then to the little girl sitting with him, and they realized how small their actions made them look. They gathered their things, silently, and slipped out of the restaurant. Back at the janitor's table, the little girl smiled at him. "You're not alone," she said. He breathed out slowly, feeling something in his chest loosen, something he had held tight for years. "Thank you," he whispered, "for being here when no one else was." She smiled wider. "That's what people should do. Be there when someone needs them." He nodded, overwhelmed by the truth in her simple words. The rest of their time at the table passed peacefully. They talked lightly about small things, about the drawings she made, about the little joys he remembered from his childhood. For a moment, the weight of the world felt lighter. As they left the restaurant together, the janitor looked back at the empty table where he had waited. Instead of remembering it as the place he had been fooled, he would remember it as the place where someone finally saw him. Someone small, someone brave, someone kind. The next morning arrived with a mix of excitement and tension in the air, as if the town itself sensed that something important was unfolding. At the school, the sun cast long golden lines through the windows, stretching across the floors where the quiet echoes of yesterday still lingered. The janitor walked in a little earlier than usual, not because he had extra work, but because he simply could not sleep. His mind kept replaying the strange blind date prank, the uneasy laughter, and the single moment of kindness that had come from the small girl who had noticed him when no one else did. He cleaned the hall slowly, his thoughts drifting. Maybe he should say something to the teachers. Maybe he should just pretend none of it happened. He had lived long enough to know that not every battle was worth fighting, and most of the time, silence protected him better than words. But this felt different. Something inside him whispered that he should not let this go like he had with everything else in life. Not because he wanted trouble, but because he wanted dignity. As he dusted the picture frames on the wall, he paused by the one showing the staff and students gathered during last year's sports day. The children were laughing, cheering, and holding banners. He remembered how he had stood behind the scenes that day, cleaning up spilled drinks and collecting the wrappers they left behind. He remembered how some of them had thanked him, but he also remembered how most never even looked at him. He sighed, wiped his hands on his trouser leg, and kept moving. He had survived worse moments in life, broken mornings, lonely nights, lost dreams that slipped away like sand through fingers. This prank was nothing compared to that. And yet it still stung, because it reminded him of the one thing he tried so hard to ignore, that the world often judged people not by their character, but by their clothes, job, or status. Around mid-morning, the teachers began to arrive. They greeted each other, carried lesson plans, and prepared their classrooms. A few nodded to the janitor as they passed him, but their steps were quick and their minds were elsewhere. Only one teacher slowed down. It was the same woman from the cafeteria, the one who had watched the prank unfold, but stayed silent. She approached him now with hesitant steps. "Good morning," she said softly. He looked up and gave a small nod. "Morning." She shifted the papers in her hands, wrestling with the words she wanted to say. I wanted to apologize for what happened yesterday. It wasn't fair to you, and I should have stopped it." He didn't respond right away. He appreciated the apology, but he could see from her eyes that she still felt unsure. Maybe she didn't know how deep those moments could cut. Maybe she didn't understand how long a person could remember a humiliation. So he kept his voice calm. "It's all right," he said. "People sometimes forget that others have feelings. But thank you for saying this." She nodded, relieved yet still carrying guilt. "I really am sorry," she repeated, then walked away. He watched her leave and continued sweeping. His heart felt slightly lighter, but not enough to erase the discomfort entirely. Later in the day, as the lunch bell rang, children rushed out into the corridors like a small river of energy. Their laughter filled the building, bouncing off each wall. In the cafeteria, the janitor helped stack trays and clean tables while the children chatted loudly. Some of them recognized him from the day before and whispered quietly among themselves. Kids were quick to pick up on adult behavior and even quicker to form opinions. He noticed it but didn't react then, as if placed there by fate. The same little girl who had defended him the previous day walked up to him with her lunch tray. She had pigtails today, tied with 2 small yellow ribbons. "Hi," she said with her innocent smile. "Hello," he replied. She hesitated before speaking, like she was trying to choose the perfect words. "Are you okay?" He blinked in surprise. Of all the people who could have asked him that, he least expected it from someone so young. He felt his chest warm slightly. "Yes," he said gently. "I'm okay." She nodded, but didn't seem fully convinced. "I told my mom what happened yesterday," she said suddenly. "She said what they did was mean." He slowly lowered the tray he was carrying. "You told her?" "Yeah." She said grown-ups should know better. She frowned deeply, her small eyebrows squeezing together. "I think so too." The janitor stood still, stunned by the weight of those simple words. It amazed him how a child could see right and wrong so clearly while adults often clouded it with excuses or laughter. "Thank you," he said softly. "For seeing me." She smiled again, the kind of smile that held no judgment or pity, just kindness. And in that moment, he realized how much a single act of compassion could lift the heaviness inside a person. The afternoon went by quietly until the school principal called him to the office. The janitor wiped his hands on his shirt, feeling a hint of anxiety. He stepped into the room to find the principal standing by the desk, holding a file. "I heard something happened yesterday," the principal said, adjusting his glasses. The janitor waited. He didn't want to cause trouble for the teachers, but he also didn't want to lie. "It was just a misunderstanding," the janitor said carefully. The principal looked skeptical. "A misunderstanding that left several people uncomfortable, from what I hear. I would like to know what really happened." The janitor explained everything, not with bitterness, not with anger, but with honesty. The principal listened quietly, his expression shifting from concern to disappointment. "That was inappropriate," the principal finally said. "A blind date joke? Involving staff? That should never have happened. I'm sorry you had to go through that." The janitor nodded. "It's all right. I don't want anyone in trouble." "I understand," the principal said, "but it still needs to be addressed." The janitor left the office feeling unsure. He hadn't intended to start anything. He had only wanted to explain. But maybe this was necessary, not for revenge, but for respect. Later that day, after school ended, the sky turned orange with the setting sun. The janitor sat on the bench outside the building, letting the cool breeze brush against his face. He watched the children leave with their parents, some running excitedly, some dragging their feet, and some waving goodbye to him with cheerful smiles. The little girl spotted him again from a distance and waved wildly, as if she was greeting someone important. And for the first time in a long while, he lifted his hand and waved back without feeling like he was pretending. As the crowd thinned, a shadow fell beside him. He looked up and saw the same teacher from early, the one who had apologized. "Can I sit for a moment?" she asked. He nodded politely. She sat down and exhaled slowly. "The principal talked to us today," she said, "and he made it very clear that what happened yesterday shouldn't have happened at all. Some of the staff are embarrassed." He said nothing, not because he was angry, but because he didn't know what to say. "I just wanted to tell you," she continued. "You handled it with a lot more grace than most people would have." Grace. He wasn't used to hearing that word connected to him. People usually described him with simple labels: quiet, hardworking, invisible. Grace was new. "I didn't want to make things worse," he said. "I just want to do my job." "I know," she said softly, "but you deserve respect too." The wind brushed past them, carrying dried leaves across the pavement. For a moment, they just sat there in a comfortable silence. Then she added quietly, "That little girl adores you. She told her whole class today that you're the kindest person in this school." He felt his lips curve into a genuine smile. He hadn't heard words like that in years. As the sky darkened, he stood up to finish the rest of his work. But this time, something inside him had changed, something small yet strong. He didn't feel invisible anymore. A child had seen him, a teacher had apologized, and even the principal had listened. These were not big victories, but they were meaningful ones. He walked back into the school with lighter steps, unaware that tomorrow would bring even more unexpected moments that would reveal who he truly was, and why one little girl's kindness had touched the entire school more than anyone expected. The next day began with a strange calmness in the school, as if the building itself sensed that something important was about to come to an end. The janitor arrived early again, unlocking doors and turning on lights in the empty hallways. But something felt different in his steps. He no longer walked as someone who blended into the background. Somewhere inside him, the quiet strength he had carried for years was finally becoming visible. He started his morning routine, the way he always did, sweeping the corridors, wiping the windows, checking the classrooms. But as he worked, he noticed more people greeting him. A simple nod, a soft smile, a few small good mornings. These gestures were tiny, almost unnoticeable, but they meant something. They meant people were thinking, reflecting, maybe even changing. Not because he had demanded it, but because truth had a way of reaching hearts when spoken with honesty. Later in the morning, the principal called for a short meeting with the staff. The janitor wasn't required to attend, but the principal insisted he be there. So he stood at the back of the room quietly, while the teachers sat facing the principal. "I want to address what happened 2 days ago," the principal said firmly. "A prank was played that should never have taken place. Inside a school, especially not. Involving a member of our staff who has done nothing but serve this place with dedication." The janitor kept his eyes lowered, though he could feel several pairs of eyes turned toward him. "This school is a community," the principal continued, "and a community falls apart when we belittle the people who hold it together. We're better than that. We must be." A few teachers shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded. Others looked embarrassed. The principal then turned to the janitor. "I want to apologize again for what happened he said. "And I hope we can all do better from now on." The room filled with quiet agreement. The janitor simply nodded. He didn't need applause. He didn't need speeches. He just appreciated that the truth was acknowledged. After the meeting, the same teacher who had apologized before walked up to him. "Thank you for being there," she said gently. "I know it wasn't easy." He smiled slightly. "Sometimes the hard things need to be faced." She returned the smile and left him to his work. As the day went on, something unexpected happened. The children seemed to sense the shift, too. They greeted him more openly, asked him small questions, even told him about their day as he cleaned the cafeteria. For the first time, he felt like a part of the place in a way he had never felt before. When lunch ended, the little girl who had defended him came running toward him again, her yellow ribbons bouncing as she moved. "I drew something for you," she said excitedly. She handed him a folded piece of paper. He opened it carefully. Inside was a crayon drawing of him standing in the hallway holding a broom. But in the drawing, his face had a bright smile, and the children around him were waving happily. Above it, in shaky childlike letters, she had written, "You make our school better." His throat tightened, and he blinked several times to keep his eyes from watering. "This is beautiful," he said softly. She beamed. "My mom said when someone makes you feel safe, you should tell them. You make me feel safe." He swallowed hard. "Thank you. That means more than you know." She hugged him quickly before running off to join her friends. He stood there for a long moment, holding the drawing close to his chest. He had spent years unseen, his presence taken for granted. And now, in the hands of a child, he held proof that kindness never went unnoticed. In the afternoon, something even more surprising happened. A small group of teachers approached him while he was mopping the hallway. They looked nervous, unsure how to begin. One of them finally spoke. "We wanted to say sorry," she said. "All of us. We shouldn't have laughed. We shouldn't have let it happen." He paused, leaning on the mop handle. He could see sincerity in their eyes, some shame, some regret, some sadness. "It's in the past," he said quietly. "But thank you." Another teacher stepped forward. "We want to make things right," she said. "So we're planning something, a small event for the students, and we'd like you to be part of it." He frowned slightly, unsure. "Part of it?" "Yes," she said. "We want the students to learn about respect, and we think your story could help." He hesitated. He wasn't the type to talk about himself. He wasn't used to being in front of crowds. But something inside him whispered that maybe this was his moment, not for attention, but for teaching. He nodded slowly. "All right." The teachers smiled gratefully and left him to finish his work. When the final bell rang, the children poured out of classrooms again. The janitor walked outside, standing near the same bench where he often rested. The golden late afternoon sun washed the schoolyard in warm light. The little girl spotted him again and waved. Her mother stood beside her this time, holding her hand. The mother approached him with a gentle smile. "My daughter told me everything," she said. "And I just want to say, thank you for being kind when others weren't." He shook his head modestly. "I didn't do anything special." "You did more than you think," she said. "You reminded people how to see others." The little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Tell him." The mother laughed softly. "Right. She wanted to invite you to dinner with us sometime, if you're comfortable with that." The janitor blinked in surprise. "Dinner?" "Yes," the mother said warmly. "Not as a joke. Not as pity. Just a meal. Just people being people." He felt something warm spread through his chest. For so long, he had lived on the edges of the world, unnoticed, unheard. And now here he was invited not as a joke, not out of obligation, but out of genuine kindness. "I'd like that," he said with a soft smile. The mother smiled back. "We'll choose a day soon." As they left, the little girl waved once more before disappearing down the path. The janitor sat on the bench again, letting the moment sink in. He thought of all the years he had worked quietly, all the mornings he woke before sunrise, all the times he ate lunch alone, all the times people looked through him instead of at him, all the times he pretended that words didn't hurt Dot, and then he thought of the little girl who saw him before anyone else did, the child who knew kindness better than the adults around her, the one who changed everything with a single sentence. "He's not funny. He's a good man." That moment had started something. A shift, a ripple, a reminder that one act of courage, no matter how small, could move hearts. Dot as the sky darkened. The janitor stood and walked back into the school to finish his tasks. But now he carried something new with him. Not a broom, not a mop. Something deeper. Dot, he carried the feeling of being seen. He carried the knowledge that kindness, when spoken by even the smallest voice, had the power to change an entire room. He carried the truth that every person, no matter their job or clothes or status, deserved respect. And most of all, he carried hope, soft, quiet, but strong. The next day, he would stand before the students during the event the teachers were planning. He would share his story in simple words, not for sympathy, but for learning. And maybe, just maybe, one more child would hear his voice and understand what the little girl already knew. Respect was not something you earned by power. It was something you gave because you were human. And at long last, the janitor felt human in everyone's eyes, not just his own. He stepped out of the school as the evening breeze brushed against him. The world looked a little brighter, a little softer, a little kinder, because one small girl had seen what others COULDN single quotes D dot, and once kindness is seen, it can never be unseen again.